Okay, this is the main event, the big show, right? Days of Decision and World in Flames. And I want to take a little moment just to drink in what this eats up. I've got a crowded room. I had to open up one shelf. It's stacked over here, mainly Napoleonics, to get a place to put my counters. Here's the Days of Decision map I'm using. Now down here I have the other Days of Decision map. I need that as a reference because it has some valuable information that it represents more quickly, but I don't need to play with it, and I'll show you why. And this will serve the same place that it did in the Days of Decision game. Go look at over on the game box. I have everything organized nicely. Days of Decision is going to be in the Between the Wars section, whereas World in Flames over here, it's going to be World War II, and I'm going to attach this monster to World War II because most of the interesting stuff is happening in World War II, even though I'm starting, this is kind of invalidating my normal way of doing things, even though I'm starting at an earlier era. I'm going to record it as being in the larger era, but to drink it all in, let's see. So here's the American map over here. Way off, yeah, there's the American Flames map I don't want to deal with. I don't own it and I wouldn't want to deal with it. The European map, and then the Scandinavian map, which is at a different scale, but it's sitting up there. It replaces these off-map boxes and gives you, a tactical bit of information. One thing you'll notice is I've got Days of Decision markers on my big map, and that's because I don't want to leave this thing set up, so I've got to indicate what resources are going where. So you'll see the resources that are claimed, the Japanese resources in the US, for example, will all show up on this map, and yeah, we'll try to do our best with it. Then we have the Africa in Flames map. Again, it's on the Asian scale, just like the Scandinavian one, and gives you, a little bit more detail in an area that you're probably not going to fight. And the same thing's true of Scandinavia. You probably don't need these. I'm going to be using the production circle here with all the information, the pilots, the impulse track. The initiative track, though, we're going to be, I think, using this one, because remember, it's a three-sided game, and that changes the nature of the initiative. The problem is, I looked at Days of Decision 3. And from what I can tell, it uses Days of Decision 2's components, but with slightly different rules, and the rules don't match the components. And I'm going to try to muddle through with Days of Decision 2 rather than print out those rules and essentially have DoD 3. I tried looking some things up, and it didn't answer any of the questions or problems that I really had in terms of integrating things. So I think I can kind of fudge it. I thought they were going to be significantly different games. And then over here we've got the Pacific map, and everybody's at peace right now with one exception, which is over here, the Italians and Ethiopians. Okay, well, that's enough of kind of broad general introduction. In terms of rules introduction, I've already done a rules introduction for Days of Decision, which I alluded to earlier, and there's also a rules introduction where I did the land sequence before I played Barbarossa, which is also available on the game box or on YouTube if you'd rather. I just think the organization on TGB is better. And then over here is I did the Pacific, I did the naval rules for that, and as usual I kind of blundered through them and don't feel like I have a real grasp of naval strategy, but I do understand some of the systems. I've done all the setup. I had to find an online aid. Apparently Days of Decision 3's rulebook is supposed to have these at the back of them. The copy of the rule book that I found online didn't have them included, but it had this as a separate file, so cool. The problem with this is it doesn't quite match the counters I have. For one thing, I spent a couple hours looking for the Japanese battleship Hai, which, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but which I knew I had from the Guadalcanal scenario, but it was missing. Well, it turns out it doesn't have a build date until 39 on the counter. I think chances are that's in the error. I think it was an older ship, but what the hell, So I just put it in the 39 pile. These are all organized by year. so that as different years force pools come out. Now that's going to be kind of problematic because I've got the Ships in Flames ships and the regular ships in there, but I don't feel like doing any more sorting. You know, I spent 2 days trying to set this up after having already spent probably another 2 days setting up the Barbarossa. So I had the Russians, the Germans, and the Guadalcanal, the U.S., Japanese, Commonwealth. It takes forever to sort and set up this game. Basically, a full group of players, or, 4 or 5 players, can probably do it in a day. But me alone, wow, it was tough, All right, it may be less than a day. I remember back with 5, we were able to set it up pretty damn quickly. But we didn't have to bother with looking at every single ship to see, hey, what's the name on that ship? Well, I can't read it because it's a Commonwealth ship, and my eyes are older than they used to be. But anyway, it definitely was somewhat difficult. And also there would be counters that just aren't even available by 36 that are being called for in some of the setups. Another example where I allowed the counter to stay on the map, MacArthur here. He doesn't come in until 38. This camera's nowhere near as good as the old one. Its focusing capabilities suck, but I got a little thing here. Maybe I can. Yep. Let's not play with that while we're videoing. How about that? Okay. Anyway. I also have the oil resources that each player has. What it comes down to is there's probably not a great order of battle for the whole world for the game at this point. So whatever you have is going to be an approximation. In the situation with MacArthur, there's some sort of force here. Whether or not it would qualify as a military leader, probably that's where the fudging is going on. Is, hey, you've got this great leader MacArthur in place, but if I remove him, I have to put something else there because there is a military unit there. And then what do I put there, and how do I, do I let the U.S. decide whether or not to move MacArthur there later? And they'll be pretty pissed if they don't put him there, but, whatever. Maybe they won't. It's not a great place for him particularly to be, but I can evacuate him anyway. So it's kind of up to the player to move things around anyway, so no big deal there. I'm again not using the task forces. I didn't use them in Guadalcanal. It's just easier for me to paw through the pieces here than have yet another big element, not huge, but the size of this, taking up space. I have a very limited amount of space here. If I was playing in, at Consim World Expo, I would be able, to fit the game on one set of tables and have some supplemental stuff. They had it all set up, including the stuff I don't have, like American Flames and I don't know. They probably had the pieces for Patton and Flames, too. They also had Khaki and Flames, which is awesome because it makes the Commonwealth counters readable. The Commonwealth counters are not bad. I don't know if you can see. These guys aren't too bad. But when they went to the dark blue, they made them horrible. And, the colors of the counter mixes, at least of the set that I have, this mix and match set of the expansions, didn't work terribly well. Now, my expansion supposedly came in a final edition box, and I would guess, given ADG or whatever's general component quality situation, and what I read with Days of Decision 3, that they just threw together the remainder of their package in with the final edition stuff, the deluxe edition, I'm sorry. And it didn't look like the stuff I had in my 2000 update was terribly better. I don't know if it was. All right, so I promised you, hey, enough of this babbling, but there really isn't a lot to cover rules wise in this introduction. This scenario sheets, yeah. And let's see if I can find a place where we can set up the rules without disturbing the Syrians there. and take a look at what's going to be different. I don't think I'm playing with any of the options. Some of them are appealing, like supply, but that's going to be effectively already handled by playing it with World in Flames. I've got to be able to set up supply with World in Flames. I'm playing out all of the movement, etc., on the whiff boards. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. Same with Trans-Siberian Railroad. I'm going to have the railway limits in play, so that's no big deal. Oil War, that's going to be automatic. I don't know if I really want to deal with Totally Wild or Leaving Your Ideology. I think I'm going to play as I did before. Leaving Your Ideology, I'm going to do as a... If someone else pushes you out of it and makes a concerted effort, you have the right to try to push yourself back into your ideology, but they can kind of fight you and try to make you... And it'll go to Totally Wild, where everyone can move. You could pull the U.S. Because it would have been possible in the 30s for the U.S. not to remain a democracy. I strongly view that FDR kind of saved democracy by forcing a compromise on wealth. And my opinion is we're not in too dissimilar an era. Well, things have cleared up, but we weren't necessarily too dissimilar an era. And we muddled through it, you know, without a revolt yet, but maybe, who knows? Okay. So the big thing is playing in World in Flames, mixing the two. And this gets really sticky. So let me explain some of what I see. First of all, here's the setup. And the setup for Ethiopia is significantly different than what is indicated here. Here they indicate basically you get Selassie and one militia, and here they indicate you get what I've shown on the board. I'm going to make life a little tougher on the Italians, because they had some trouble in Ethiopia, and if it's too tough, well, oh well. All right. This setup doesn't really work too well. It essentially is designed for Whiff 5, and there's a lot more pieces in the game with all the expansions and everything, so I want to go with the one that I'm going with over there, for the most part. Okay, but yeah, as I said, the sequence of play is kind of tricky. Now, first thing is there's major power initiative. This has to be early in the turn, and it is in Whiff as well, so that you can make the political picks over here. That it has to be baked into that, and it still will be. Then here's what's weird. You get a weather action. Now, the way this is written, you get one weather for the whole turn. That doesn't work. That's not Whiff anymore. World in Flames, one of the big factors of it is you got the weather each impulse, and you've got that kind of gut-wrenching, oh God, it could go wrong, you know, all being worked into it. And it's not going to be the same game if you have one weather for the whole turn, and you know it's going to be clear all through July and August. You're pretty sure it will be, but you know, or worse, geez, I got one bad roll and now the whole 2 months is shot. Nah, you know, that's no fun. So what I'm going to do here, there's a reason the weather's first. It's because the players in Days of Decision are making war declaration choices during prior to the normal military sequence. Now, in World in Flames, you declare war after you see the weather, during your impulse. You make a choice of what you're going to do, and you can launch an attack. What I see is that it's not too different. Here's what I'm going to change there. And this may be what DoD3 does, because it seems the obvious to me. A player can declare war, and they will see the weather for the first impulse up here. A player can declare war on that. They can also pay the option to declare war, but not take it during the impulses, because the war is actually still going to be declared during the impulses, and that's important because of surprise, etc. You know, if Russia gets the initiative, you shouldn't be forbidden from declaring war as Germany. You can just let Russia waste a turn, an impulse, and then declare war on them and still get the surprise and all the bonuses from that. So that's kind of one little thing that was kind of disturbing. Okay. Another important thing is this ideological initiative. We'll touch more into that, but remember what I said over here. We have this ideological initiative, three-sided game over in Days of Decision, but World in Flames is a two-sided game. I may be tinkering with this because I don't know if it's going to work very well. I don't like what it does. And what I saw from the DoD-3 is that it seems to use this initiative track, but each side gets their initiative in a location here. So you can't use the DoD, the normal whiff initiative track over here straight up, because that's designed to only handle 2 powers. Which means that the marker, if it moved forward 3 times, would be moving too quickly. But what I could do is track the initiative in such a way that it moves at the speed it would in World in Flames. And, you know, just the second player doesn't push the initiative marker forward or something along those lines. There is still going to be a danger with that because the player, the end turn condition will happen after each player's turn. So I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that kind of tinkering either, but we'll see what the actual rule works as. Okay, anything else exciting here? Okay, we'll touch on the rest of things as they come, but otherwise this is mainly the World in Flames sequence of play with a little bit of tinkering to allow the political aspects to work better and the 3-player aspects. All right, so few important little things are here. Garrisons. You have to match the garrison ratios in Days of Decision, but this is going to be based on the garrison values from World in Flames. We didn't really deal with this yet, but basically troops that you have on the border affect your garrison ratio. And if you have a peace treaty, there's certain other factors in play, which we'll have to look at. Civil War are going to be a little different. You follow the Days of Decision IPO 4. That's what, this card, the coup card, which is what generates a civil war. And you split by the unit. You get a proportion of the units. And then you fight it out tactically using whiff. Production will be handled during Days of Decision. But basically you can move units in, etc. using you'd have to use normal transport to get units into the Civil War and lend them. Okay. Military affairs is just going to be World in Flames. So now here we come to the trickiest thing, the ideological initiative. So you did the major power initiative for the political phase, but this isn't going to affect things. Instead, each ideology has their own initiative. Put 1 communist and democratic initiative markers on the any may demand re-roll triangle on the ideological initiative track, and the fascist on the fascist box. And we have like 3, 2, and 1. So here's the fascist box, and these are these 2. Let's see. And I've read this, but I didn't like it. Now place the second of each ideological marker in the current initiative box with the fascists on top. We'll see. Democrats second and communists on the bottom. Each turn after the initiative's been resolved, the major power with the highest major power initiative from each ideology rolls a die. I'm assuming that's a six-sider because this is Days of Decision rules. Add 1 to the die roll if your ideological initiative marker is on top, i.e. the fascists. Whoever's the highest has the initiative. If 2 or more, the ideology lowest down to the stack in the current initiative box has the better initiative. You rearrange the counters to reflect the new combat initiative. Now, the ideology with the bottom initiative, the major power who rolled for initiative may now demand a re-roll. And in order to do so, you're going to trigger something like the initiative track penalty up here, +1, +2. If you're in the any may demand re-roll triangle, you move the other markers into their respective boxes, if all 3 are in that space. Otherwise, if you're in your box, you drop into the triangle. If a re-roll is demanded by an ideology, all 3 ideologies re-roll, and there's only 1 re-roll allowed per turn. Okay. If all 3 powers are in the triangle of the ideological initiative track, the ideology markers, yeah, this is just repeating what we said before. Okay. And then if the top ideology wants to go first, then the middle must decide if he wants to go second or third, and if not, the bottom would be second. Now, that's part of the ideology. Most of the rest of this handles how to handle, attacking stacks that include powers that aren't at war with you. Some of that's already covered in WIF as far as I remember. Okay, at the end of the action phase, you roll for the ideology. And the action segment ends if the modified die roll is -2 or less. So it's -1 for each full round of action segments after each of the 3 powers goes. -1 if the weather includes a circled 3. See, this is what I don't want to fuck around with, right? I like this track. I like the way it just clearly states what's going to happen. -2 if it's a circled 5. This means turns could end very quickly, right? So if it's really bad weather, well, it's still not going to end on 1 action. And a circled 5 is going to jump you way up. So maybe it's okay. And then rules for passing and what that's going to affect. And the person with the higher initiative has more bonus passing. And that, again, is an influence of what the line would be like. So I think it's an attempt to kind of represent that track with a die roll situation. And we'll give it a shot. If I really hate it, we'll move back to the other. And if the turn doesn't end, the next ideology goes. Now, as I said, there doesn't seem to be any indication of weather happening during the impulses itself. So after every 3 activations, we're going to go to another weather segment because I don't like a whole turn's weather being a single thing. During production, okay, U.S. entry. So World in Flames uses a U.S. entry rules with chits and all kind of abilities that come to the U.S. as they reach certain U.S. entry factors. Days of Decision says the U.S. can do what it wants, but the things it does and the things other people do drive its initiative, its entry level. So we're just going to play with Days of Decision for that. That's what they suggest here. You can Vichy countries other than France, as in DoD. Russian-Japanese peace phase, we'll use DoD's surrender rules. And that's about it. Then there's this next section which indicates how to switch over if you wanted to play this into the Days of Decision side until the Great War breaks out, or the General War breaks out, and then you'd set this up and you translate the forces. It was something I don't think was mentioned. Naval treaties, you count ships, individual ships. That seems a little weird, just because those treaties were based on tonnage. So I'm kind of trying to wonder, well, do I want to go more granular than that? I don't think so. I think I'll go with the individual ships, and then those individual ships will be multiplied by the national multiplier to determine whether or not you're within the restrictions of the treaty, or whether or not you get the penalty is the big thing here. The restriction of the treaty. If you've got the top naval rating, you're probably not too interested in building up your ships unless you're Germany. And of course, if you sign to the naval treaty and you're Germany, you probably aren't interested in building up the ships. We're going to see what happens. The old WIF 5 used to have some interesting capabilities for Germany, where they could really smash into the Western Allies, especially once they take France out. They could actually launch an attack on Spain fairly easily, get Gibraltar, and that would open up opportunities to go for India. You know, another option is, if you don't want to make that big thrust for Gibraltar, Italian naval air was very powerful. I think that's been downgraded a little bit in the final edition, along with some other tinkerings. I think what they were finding was people were discovering exploits that were no longer historical, but were good gameplay, and they just didn't work well. And of course, I will be totally confused as to what to do navally, but I'll tell you what, I'll also be totally confused as to what to do diplomatically. If you recall, in DoD, I was having a tough time figuring out, you know, what do I want to do? And then I kind of got into the flow of things. Maybe I'll understand naval actions. One thing I forgot in my DoD game, I think, was this Ethiopian situation. I think I just left Italy out of it. I read and noted that they were there, that they were at war, and then I think I forgot about it. Well, it's a lot harder to forget about it when I got troops right there hitting each other. We got a bunch of ships already on the track, and things in the construction naval pool. We got some pilots in play. We got all kind of fun stuff to do. And what is this? Oh boy. All kinds of informations on the planes that I have not read or paid attention to. It's all in the rules, and some of it I may have been paying attention to, but some of it probably not. Okay, well, that's the introduction to Nightmare in Flames, and this has been a nightmare for me for the past month so far, and probably for another couple months at least. Should have time to clip the Gathering Storm by then. Alright, let's send this up. Alright, screw it. I printed out some stuff from DoD 3, and I'm going to use those rules. Maybe I'll miss some things because I'm not printing out the whole damn rule book. But I printed out, 8 pages of the WIF to DoD 3 rules. And then I also printed out all the political option explanations. These are going to supersede what's on the cards. Now, from what I understand, what was on the cards is what was originally provided to people in DoD 3. And in fact, this also was provided, and it doesn't seem to actually work correctly. We'll talk about a little bit that I have to modify to make things work. The DoD 3 rulebook seems to be also a hash-pash, or hodgepodge, if you'd rather use an actual word, of, well, I wanted to use hash and, you know, mix it with hodgepodge, and it seemed like a cool idea. Every bit as much as DoD 2 is, and just as unfinished a product, but it looks like they solved some of the problems in it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about U.S. entry, which is one of the first things here. Now, U.S. entry is handled over in WIF, and we have to kind of understand how WIF does it. before we can understand what's changing. So what WIF does is it maintains a pool of an entry pool and a tension pool, and those are going to be filled with these suckers. Now, DoD3 says, hey, just use the 1939 and 1940 chits. However, instead of maintaining just a pool against Germany and Italy and another pool to handle Japan, you're going to have a pool against every opponent faction, which means, well, every opponent nation, or every nation that's outside of the democracies, which means the Soviet Union could well end up pissing you off enough that you go to war with them instead, or have the capability to do so. Okay, so the way the U.S. entry works, I believe once the war starts, you start getting a chit a turn, no matter what. And those have a variable value on them. And the way it works, though, in general, is that when somebody does something, you make a die roll to see if you get a chit there. Now, so for example, if Japan declares war on the USSR, if you roll a 7 or less, you get a chit in your entry pool. Okay. Tension pool is something a little different. If there's a negative, let's find one, -9, for example, very likely to give you, that removes a chit from the entry pool, I believe. If you roll that. Now, you'll also have a tensions pool, which is a little different, and that'll affect its war chart. Okay. And they have to be kept kind of in balance. If this number is a multiple of 10, so for example, 35 here, you'll get 3 automatic chits and a 50% chance of an additional chit being put into your entry pool. And likewise with negatives, it could remove chits. Now, the entry options, and these are specified against individual nations. We'll do them against the correct nation if it gets that far. It probably will, because if you think about it, if this system works, the U.S. will not be entering when the general war starts, right? Okay, so when the U.S. starts reaching certain levels of tension, not tension, of entry level, they're able to take some of these entry options. And when they do an entry option, that gives a number next to it, which is the chance of a chit moving from the entry pool over to the tensions pool. Now, at any point that you want to declare war, you take the political operation to declare war, and you see if you succeed. In order to succeed, you compare the entry value in chits that you have up against the tension value in chits. These are 2 separate pools that each nation has, each possible opponent. And in fact, you have entry option chits against even democratic nations. And you'll get a chance to declare war expressed as a die roll needed on a 10-sided die. Okay. Now, what's different because we're using the days of decision is each 10 points that are generated over here on the U.S. entry into war effects are going to generate a chit, right? And then if you have less than 10, you get a die roll on it. But I believe there's a multiplier here, which is I don't remember if it's times 2 or times 3. This is an option to use this instead, but Um, I had this multiplier noted somewhere. Well, I don't want to look for it too hard, but basically these don't correspond, the U.S. entry values don't correspond directly to those 10 points. There's a multiplier in place, and I think it's times 2. So they're a little heavier. Because there's such a limited pool of chits, only the 1939 and 40 chits, and the U.S. has to disperse them between, at least at the beginning, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union, that means that you're likely to run out of chits. And if that happens, a certain amount of chits are revealed, and those values are then going to be recorded as a baseline, and then you get additional chits. Now, there are some rules in WIF. If you run out of chits and stuff, you can never go to war. Obviously, that's not going to work, so I assume that those get suspended. Okay, what else? Well, they have their own section on playing with World in Flames, and notably, weather is handled more or less how I said. You don't have the roll beforehand, and I think I'm going to still do that from the DoD-2. You roll the weather and the impulse like you normally would, and if you don't want to declare war during the impulse, you don't have to. Although that's not actually explicitly called out. Ideological initiative changes as well. The way this works, and again, they don't handle what's going on here, but they seem to say, hey, just use the WIF Final Edition for the impulse track, right? Well, that's not going to work with 3 powers. So what I'm going to do is the first power moves it forward, the second power does not, and the third power does. And it increases the chances, or maybe first power moves it forward. No, first power does not move it forward. Second power moves it forward. Third power moves it forward. The reason for that is I want to reduce the possibility of a turn ending too quickly. The way it's worded, if everybody gets their full impulse and you just keep moving it forward, well, you're increasing the chance of the turns ending, and I think not enough is going to happen during them. This is sort of a compromise between what DoD-3 is doing and I don't know. And I guess what the other situation is. And it is going to be a little bit faster turn, a little bit shorter turns, not necessarily faster. Now, the way the ideological initiative works is you're going to have boxes that range. I think you're going to be using the initiative track here, but that doesn't seem to quite apply. Basically, what they have is a 0, a +1, a +2, and a -1, which don't quite match what's on here. I don't know if they changed the graphics and printed a new sheet or not. It seems like they didn't print up, from what I heard, they didn't print any new components for it. They just printed a new roll book. But maybe that's mistaken. Okay, so the idea here is there's going to be 3 powers. They each roll a die, and ties are settled in favor of the person with the least advantage and initiative from the last turn. No, order. It'll be broken in reverse to order. So if you went first in the last turn, you lose all ties. If you went third in the last turn's impulse segment, you'll win all ties. Now, you're allowed to re-roll if you're in the +1 or +2 box, starting with the guy who came last on the roll, and that'll re-roll it once. I think it'll move you in the box, and if you went first and last in the order, if you got more actions than anyone else, you lose a point of initiative on the bonuses. And I think what we're going to do with the bonuses is this is going to be the 0 position, being in here. This will be the +1 position, and then we can do +2 with 2 counters, since everybody's got 2 counters. I don't know what to do with the extra communist counter. For the -1, I'll shift them into a different box or something. We'll just try to use this track as a track that goes from +1, from -1 to +2. We may instead decide to use the base initiative track up there and use the markers on there. That may work more easily, but we can express all the different values with either chart. It's just a matter of which one's easier to understand. What else do we have? They handle really obscene situations, like 3-player naval battles happening, 3-sided naval battles happening, and stuff like that, which we cannot worry about. There's a lot of expansions and optional information in here. So, for example, instead of first of all, there's a limit to which entry options the U.S. can play, and some of them are already handled through the regular options. There's also a there's also stuff from the expansions that I don't have, things like Leaders in Flames, that give additional entry options and stuff like that. And that's all kind of baked into these rules in a really, really difficult to understand sort of fashion. So, for example, in the U.S. entry, let's see, we have options from Leaders in Flames here, and it's not really clear whether we're still in Leaders in Flames coming down here. I think this is a Leaders in Flames one if a Democratic major power rents convoy points. I don't remember any rule about that in WIF. But then down here it starts to seem like other fashion, other non-LIF specific rules. So it's not really clear where one kind of runs together and comes out and becomes something else, but that's not too surprising. Basically, we're gluing together something that I think is going to be more effective, though. Now, the other thing I'm going to have to do, and I'm not going to subject you to any real explanation of this, is here's the new political options. Now, this is a good 30 pages or so of the information, well, some of the information that's in DoD2 explaining some of the options, but also the information that's on these option cards is no longer relevant, but I think the values on the cards are. That's my understanding, and they kind of correspond. But I know there's things like a Republican could win the election in the United States, probably through a failure to properly call the election at the right time. So I think there's going to be a lot of little richness in the events in the options explanation, and that'll make my life happier. I like, blundering along. I don't want to play... I have this fear that I'm going to replay the last DoD2 game that I started, and I really don't want to see that happen again. So I want some more variability in it. What does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to be blundering through the game a little bit more. So we may see some weirder events happen here. We may see some situations where stuff doesn't make sense. But there's other things that the game doesn't really have the components to support. So, for example, let's not make a mess here. We really feel like we're likely to. The Russians here, these red counters, those are the Russian entry chits to handle any peace treaties that the Russians have in World in Flames. For example, the Russians will have a peace treaty with the Germans in World in Flames, and they also have one with the Japanese. And they're going to use those counters to supplement their offensive and defensive garrison values. And they're kind of random picks that you're allowed to place, and you're allowed to move them back and forth to indicate diplomatic aspects. Well, there's other powers in the game that can come to some sort of peace treaty. So they would be using the same chits as the Russians would. And again, if you run out of chits, hey, you reveal a certain number of them, mark it down as known values, and then start over again with a certain amount of hidden values already in place. All right. So that's a little addendum to what we had discussed before. And now I'm nowhere near starting because I got to read through all these options and try to understand how the game has changed in terms of the flavor of the options. But I think there's a lot more richness to them. I know there's these MPOs, major power options, that are sort of like these IPOs. I think they're extensions of the zero option, to tell you the truth, but I'm not sure. They seem to have more flavor to them. So we'll see, you know, whether they're actually richer or not. And well, that's it for now.